How could an entire family sleep through a blizzard in a thin hide tent without freezing to death? Imagine standing on the Great Plains in the middle of January. The wind cuts across the open land with nothing to stop it for hundreds of miles. Temperatures plunge far below zero. Snow, drifts, swallow the earth. A modern camper with expensive gear might survive a night or two. An unprepared traveler could die before dawn. And yet for centuries, Native American tribes of the plains lived through winters like this, inside teepees made from wooden poles and buffalo hides. No insulation foam, no brick walls, no electric heat, no glass windows. Just fire, hides, airflow, and knowledge. To outsiders, the teepee looked temporary, almost fragile. But hidden inside that simple cone-shaped shelter was one of the most intelligent survival systems ever created in North America. A structure so efficient that many modern survival principles still follow the exact same logic today. And the most surprising part? The secret wasn't only the fire. It was the design nobody notices. The teepee was never just a tent. It was engineered for survival. Every part of its shape served a purpose. The cone design was incredibly important on the open plains where brutal winds never stopped moving. Unlike square shelters that caught gusts along flat walls, the teepee allowed wind to flow around it smoothly. Storms wrapped around the structure instead of tearing directly against it. This single design choice changed everything. Snow slid naturally down the sloped sides instead of collecting on the roof. The circular interior distributed heat evenly. Strong wooden poles leaned inward to create a stable frame, flexible enough to survive heavy wind pressure without collapsing. Most teepees were constructed from long lodgepole pine or cedar poles tied together near the top. Over this skeleton, thick buffalo hides were stretched tightly and anchored to the ground. In winter, additional hide liners were added inside the walls, creating trapped pockets of air. That hidden airspace acted like insulation. Modern homes still use the same principle. The people who built these shelters understood something many modern people forget. Survival is not about fighting nature. It is about directing it. And nowhere was that more obvious than the fire burning at the center. At night, the fire became the heart of the entire world inside the teepee. But controlling it required skill. Too much fire and smoke filled the shelter, choking everyone inside. Too little fire and the cold slowly crept into blankets, hides, and lungs. Plains tribes learned how to maintain steady, controlled heat instead of massive flames. The positioning mattered. The wood mattered. The airflow mattered. Above the fire sat one of the most brilliant features of the teepee: adjustable smoke flaps near the top opening. These flaps could be turned depending on wind direction. When angled correctly, they created a draft that pulled smoke upward while keeping precious heat inside. It worked almost like a natural ventilation engine. Many modern cabins struggle with smoke circulation even today. But Plains tribes mastered this centuries earlier, using only observation and experience passed through generations. At night, fires were often reduced to glowing embers and covered lightly with ash. This allowed heat to remain alive until morning without wasting fuel. Before sunrise, a simple stir could awaken the fire again. The teepee never truly became cold. Some early European observers were shocked by how warm these shelters could remain even during severe storms. From outside, the structure appeared primitive. Inside, it functioned like a carefully balanced thermal system. But even the best fire could not solve the greatest danger of winter: the ground itself. Cold air is dangerous. Frozen earth is deadly. The ground steals heat faster than wind because direct contact drains body temperature continuously through conduction. Native American tribes understood this long before modern science explained it. So they built upward. The floor inside a winter teepee was layered carefully. First came grass, reeds, willow branches, or brush. Above that came woven mats. Then buffalo robes, elk hides, deer skins, and fur blankets were added in layers. These were not simple beds. They were insulation systems. Every layer trapped small pockets of warm air, while separating sleeping bodies from frozen soil beneath them. The thicker the layers became, the more efficiently body heat remained inside the sleeping space. Modern sleeping pads use exactly the same principle today. Children were usually placed deepest into the warm bedding. Adults slept in circles around the fire. Elders stayed closest to the heat source. Every position inside the teepee had purpose. And then there was another source of warmth many people underestimate: other human beings. Winter survival on the plains was never individual. It was communal. Entire families often slept together inside a single teepee. Parents, children, grandparents, and relatives shared space closely during dangerous cold periods. To modern audiences, this might sound uncomfortable, but comfort was never the priority. Heat was. Human bodies generate enormous warmth when gathered together in enclosed spaces. Combined with the insulated walls and controlled fire, a sleeping family could dramatically raise the interior temperature of the shelter. Infants were wrapped tightly in fur and protected between adults. Smaller children stayed near mothers or grandparents. Elders remained close to the fire, where heat was strongest. Even dogs sometimes contributed warmth inside winter shelters. The teepee became a living system where every person helped everyone else survive. Today, survival experts call this shared thermal retention. Plains tribes simply called it life. And yet one of the smartest features of the entire structure remained almost invisible. The walls themselves were breathing. One of the greatest misconceptions about teepees is that they were sealed shut. They were not. The genius of the structure came from controlled airflow. In winter, an interior lining was often hung several feet inside the outer hide walls. This created an insulating air chamber between the two layers. Cold air entering near the base became trapped and warmed gradually before rising upward. At the same time, smoke from the central fire naturally pulled air toward the top opening. The entire shelter functioned like a slow-moving climate control system. Fresh oxygen entered low. Smoke exited high. Warmth circulated constantly. During storms, smoke flaps were adjusted carefully according to wind direction. Experienced families understood exactly how weather interacted with airflow. A small change in flap angle could transform the interior environment completely. In summer, the lower edges of the hides could be raised to increase ventilation and cooling. In winter, everything was sealed tightly against snow and wind. The teepee adapted with the seasons. This flexibility made it superior to many rigid structures built by settlers later arriving on the plains. Some wooden cabins trapped moisture, smoke, and stale air far worse than native shelters did. But none of this would have worked without the animal that made plains survival possible: the buffalo. For the plains tribes, the buffalo was survival itself. Nearly every part of the animal served a purpose. Meat provided calories during brutal winters. Bones became tools. Sinew became cordage. But hides may have been the most important resource of all. Buffalo hides were incredibly effective against wind and cold. Thick winter hides with fur attached acted as natural insulation layers far superior to thin cloth fabrics used by many early settlers. A single hide could block freezing wind while trapping warmth inside the shelter. Inside the teepee, people wore layered robes made from buffalo, deer, elk, and other animal skins. Fur trapped warm air close to the body while resisting moisture and wind. Even partially damp hides often retained warmth better than woven fabrics. This mattered enormously during snowstorms and freezing nights. To the tribes of the Great Plains, buffalo were not just animals. They were shelter, clothing, blankets, fuel carriers, tools, life itself. And in winter, survival often depended on how efficiently every single resource was used. Nothing could be wasted. The greatest survival tool inside the teepee was not the fire. It was knowledge. Children grew up learning how to read weather patterns, manage airflow, maintain embers, prepare bedding, and position hides correctly. Survival knowledge was passed down constantly through observation and experience. People understood where to place the entrance based on prevailing winds. They knew how to anchor the structure against storms. They recognized dangerous changes in smoke behavior that signaled airflow problems. Every winter became a classroom. This knowledge was especially important during blizzards. Severe storms could bury shelters under snowdrifts, while temperatures plunged into deadly ranges. Families learned how to maintain interior warmth even when fuel became scarce. And unlike modern society, they could not rely on emergency rescue. If the system failed, people died. That reality forced innovation. The teepee survived for centuries not because it was primitive, but because it worked extraordinarily well in one of the harshest environments in North America. And strangely enough, modern survival science keeps rediscovering the same lessons. Look closely at modern cold weather survival gear, and you will see echoes of the teepee everywhere. Layered insulation, ventilation control, thermal air gaps, ground separation, heat retention, shared body warmth. The principles never changed. Modern mountaineers use insulated sleeping pads because frozen ground steals body heat. Arctic jackets trap warm air exactly like layered fur robes once did. Ventilation systems in winter tents still balance oxygen flow against heat loss just like smoke flaps did centuries ago. Technology improved, but the science stayed the same. The Plains tribes understood winter not as an enemy to defeat, but as a force to work with intelligently. Their shelters used physics, airflow, insulation, and communal survival strategies so effective that many remain relevant even today. And perhaps that is the biggest misunderstanding modern people have about ancient survival. We assume old cultures lacked sophistication because their technology looked simple. But simplicity is often the final stage of mastery. So how did Native Americans sleep inside teepees without freezing to death? Not through luck. Not through toughness alone. They survived because they mastered principles modern people rarely think about anymore. Insulation, airflow, layered warmth, fuel control, community, and adaptation to nature instead of resistance against it. The teepee was not a crude shelter standing against winter. It was a carefully refined survival machine shaped by centuries of experience across the Great Plains. And maybe that is what makes it so fascinating today. In a world filled with electric heat, insulated walls, and modern technology, many people would struggle to survive even a single winter night without those comforts. Yet entire generations once endured storms, blizzards, and deadly cold using knowledge carried in memory rather than machines. Perhaps the past was never as primitive as we imagine. Perhaps it simply understood survival differently. If this journey into forgotten winter survival surprised you, let us know which detail amazed you most. Was it the airflow system, the insulated flooring, or the way entire families shared heat together through the night? And if you enjoy uncovering the hidden intelligence of ancient worlds, subscribe to Shadows of Valhalla for more stories where history, survival, and human ingenuity meet in the dark. Because sometimes the oldest knowledge still burns the brightest.